Welcome to Guardians of the Data. I'm your host, Ward Balzerzak. Each episode will explore the passions, expertise, and real-world experiences of security leaders who are helping the future of data security and governance. Guardians of the Data is made possible by support from Centra. To learn more about our AI-powered data security platform, please visit centra.io. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of Guardians of the Data. I'm your host, Ward Balzerzak. I've got a great guest with me today. He has almost 20 years of experience in cybersecurity and currently advisor to multiple organizations. He's the global CISO at Elevate Textiles. Please welcome Rick Scot.
Hello. Good afternoon.
I'm really excited to have you here. I'm looking forward to our conversation, Rick. So let's jump into it. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Perfect. All right. Well, in your professional opinion, what's the biggest challenge that organizations are facing when it comes to data security?
Data security, it's people, it's the insider. And it's not the malicious insider, it's the insider that does something they don't know they shouldn't be doing. You know, whether it's sending out information they shouldn't, thinking there's the CFO example, the CFO is asking for bank data, things like that shouldn't go out, and it's not the CFO, it's a deep fake. It's, I think it's the social engineering, the social engineering tactics, especially with the advent of Gen AI, has gotten a lot better. As have deep fakes, to be honest. And a lot, I think the last statistic I saw, it's been a while, 40% of ransomware attacks are started through a phishing email. So, if you're not catching it and they're getting more sophisticated, it becomes easier and easier for the adversary to get into your system. And data, I was a data guy. I started in 2007. I took over the data team, and the Friday before I started my new role, we had the largest insider breach, and this person had stolen over 2 million records. And I was given the wonderful task of killing everyone's access to the data and making them reapply for it. I wasn't very well liked, but I understood, and that really, I did some huge data transformations, mergers, things like that. And so I am very data driven. I like to dig in the data. It's why I love threat intelligence, because I'm constantly digging into things and trying to kind of connect the dots. I see patterns, and really more, I see anomalies. People hate showing me spreadsheets because they'll go fast and I'll make them go back because I'll see something that doesn't fit. And I don't know what it said, but I know that it's different than what the other rows are. And so for me, data drives everything. Everything we do is data, regardless of what, when you think about cyber and you think about ransomware as an act, as it's data exfiltration. They're stealing your data. That's what they're about. That's how they're holding your data hostage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. A lot of it goes back to the people. And I further agree. It's, everyone likes to sit there and think it's going to be the glamorous, it's going to be a nation state coming after me. It's going to be, cyber criminals. And yes, absolutely. Sometimes it is. But the unglamorous side is that insider that is just trying to do their job. I was talking to another individual, and it's something like, I forget the number they said, but we'll say 70%, right? So if you break down insider risk or insider threats into that, 70% are just people trying to do their job day in and day out, and whoopsies, they did, one thing, two things, whatever, that results in a problem. So for you, what have you done? I mean, it sounds like you kind of got thrust in, based on an insider situation. What have you done kind of since then to try to shore up defenses and detect those before they become problems?
I think there's a lot of tools that can be used, but they only go so far. Um, I've watched over the last few years the evolution of cyber awareness training. Um, I spent a good amount of time. Uh, I do, as you said at the beginning of the intro, I'm an advisor, and I speak in the classroom at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. And I talk about, I pre-COVID, I did a session on the use of LinkedIn and the use of social engineering and social media. And really it's that kind of, those kinds of conversations. And it's making it personal, helping people understand, that this is how they're going to get your data. They're going to social engineer you, and they're very sophisticated. It's something as simple as you get an email from someone, a message from someone on LinkedIn who says, hey, they know you went to Columbia, um, and they know that you like bulldogs because you have your dogs as your banner. And, they that's how they get in. They're hacking the brain, really. And, how are they then say, they build a relationship and a rapport. Hey, I've got a recruiter that's looking for someone with your skill set. Well, the recruiter is the same person. It's just a different fake LinkedIn profile. So, again, it's very sophisticated. They're playing the long game in some cases. So really they're not, it's not that quick win. They're coming in and they're going to spend 3, 4, 5 months, sometimes 6 months getting you. And then they're going to steal all your data. They're going to steal all your information, or, they're going to have you apply for a job that's not real. And, and then really at the end of the day, from an organizational perspective, if I don't know where the data is going, and if I don't have visibility into that, and it gets out, I don't know what people are doing. Without the tools, I don't have the visibility into what people are doing. Without the data tagging and, the type of work, and data loss prevention and data security, posture management, those types of things, I think are really important. But I also think it's equally important to have the conversation, meet people where they are. Because if you throw training at people, at least today, this is just my opinion and my experience, is when you throw data at people and you throw these trainings at people, they're just clicking, you know.
Guilty. I've done it. I've done it.
Me too. Me too. And part of it, I get a little arrogant. Well, this is what I do for a living, so I know what I'm doing. Um, and if I don't get 100%, I get really mad. And I'm like, maybe I shouldn't just click through it. I should pay attention. But I think we all have to look at that. We all have to watch out for it. And, cyber awareness training is important, but it has to evolve. I heard the CISO from another manufacturing company speak, and he talked about how he educated people in the manufacturing plant. And what he said really resonated with me, which was, you meet people where they are, you talk about things that are important to them. Because if I just throw at you some random, um, you know, here's Ward, and he, and he says he's your friend, and they're not going to relate to that. But if I go to them and I ask questions, and hey, have you ever received an email where you thought you owed Nortel money? Well, that's a phishing email. And I feel like when you make it personal, and I think this is human nature, all of a sudden people relate, and they start to think about it, and because it's something that's happened to you, and it's something that's happened to them that they've not even realized in some cases.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting you bring up the industry, because as I too spent a little bit of time in manufacturing, and I don't know your thoughts, but I know back then for me being in security, the hardest folks to really get through to were the shop floor individuals, right? They're on the line. Yeah, they've got a terminal there, but they're not really at the terminal that much. They're turning a wrench. They're doing this, that. So, I mean, is that one of your hard folks, groups to get through to?
That's really what it is. I think more than anything else, it's that large group of people, and they're most of our employee population. They don't have access to email. They don't have access to our systems, except for what's on the floor. What's on the floor drives my business. So they're just as susceptible if, whether it's someone that they know, because in some cases, they're small, tight-knit communities, or someone coming from the outside. You just don't know.
So, insider threats, we'll call it maybe the accidental insider, right? The folks that aren't meaning to be bad. Couple that with manufacturing to add on to what you just said. The majority of your folks don't really have access to much. How has that kind of maybe forced you to think in certain ways about a security strategy for your environment?
It's a really good question because I'm right in the middle of that right now,
Oh, there we go.
really looking at that side of things, and understanding, again, every manufacturing plant is different. I'll be honest, I've been in my role for 6 months. I spent 23 years in the financial sector. It's a very different. Um, it's not as I'm not as constricted, with the exception of dollars. I think budget's an issue regardless of sector, but I don't have the regulations. We're a privately held company. I don't have the SEC requirements, but I have the requirements in my head and the way that I operate. I have the relationships with law enforcement. I do the things that will protect my company because I was talking to my boss about it today. It's not if, it's when. And, and in a lot of cases, how do I tell the story about the risk? And how do I quantify that? And how do I quantify the risk of if this happens, so if it's X, then here's, and we're down for X amount of time, here's what here's the loss projected. If we spend this amount of money, then it reduces that risk by X percent. So I come at it from that perspective. I really look at, the threats. I think I read somewhere the threat is your insider. And it should, again, I go back to it. It's your data. It's all data. It's zeros and ones, and everybody, people have access to data and information, whether it's financials or they're paying suppliers or they're getting paid by vendors and wondering where their money is. And, so it's being able to use the tools that you have, but also ensure that you're communicating with your staff and with your employees so that they understand.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've had a few guests talking about partnerships, right? Being able to really build a relationship with the business, which, I think back to the start of my career, around about the same time, probably you started yours. Cybersecurity, they're the scary folks, big brother, trench coats, matrix looking folks, if you will, that no one wanted to deal with. So, early on, it was kind of breaking down that and getting people to realize, like, I'm actually a human, like, let's talk. I'm not here to be a problem or a barrier for you. um I'm really curious, and our audience might be as well. So you come from a financial, or you worked in financial for a while, and obviously in financial services you've got those compliance frameworks, regulatory frameworks. Generally speaking, what some of your most sensitive data is going to be: PII, financials, whatnot. Now you've shifted into manufacturing, right? So I'm going to make the assumption that your primary data type has likely shifted as well. So when you think about what your crown jewels are, how has that kind of helped you or forced you to shape your security strategy for your insiders, right? To really make sure you know what your data is and where it's at.
Well, I think you said it previously. It's knowing your business. A lot of times, to your point, people see cybersecurity as kind of that necessity, and people don't want to understand the business. I've always been business focused. It's where how I started my career. I worked on the business side of things. And so I always feel like if I have the institutional knowledge, then I can better protect the company. If I understand the business, and I will tell you in 6 months, I understand a whole lot more. Every day I learn something new. Um, and it's which I love. And that's part of the joy of working in this field is there's always something new to learn. There's always some new adversary, some new attack vector, there's always something. Um, and I feel like I have to take all of that out of it. So whether it's, someone taking over your account on the financial sector side, or someone coming in here and stealing intellectual property, I have to treat those as the same thing. It doesn't matter what the data is. How do I protect the data holistically, regardless of where I sit, whether it's the financial sector or manufacturing?
Yeah, I love that, and I think that gets missed. And I don't think it gets missed by folks like you or I, because we've been here, we know it. I think it gets missed by some of the higher level executives in a company because, and I heard it at my last job. I was working for a financial institution, and there was this whole mentality of well, it's public data, right? That we ended up having, and I had to keep reminding folks that it's like, yes, technically speaking, some of the data is public, right? Name, address, stuff like that. But when you combine all of that together with some additional nuggets of data, that could become highly confidential, and I really don't think our customers want that to get out, right? And really getting people to understand that was a big hurdle. So bringing that back to the insider, um, I'm going to make an assumption that when it comes to education of the masses, you've had to do some of that as well when it's not, again, necessarily cut and dry. Hey, we don't really have PII. We have this other stuff, but oh, by the way, it's just as sensitive as that stuff.
There's MNPI in every business, regardless of whether you're private or public. Um, your MNPI may not drive your stock price because you're a privately held company, but if someone were to get a hold of your financials, what could that do? If someone were to understand that, hey, you're going to merge with X company, what can they do with that information and with that data? And you know, I it's funny that because you talk about PII. I remember having a conversation many years ago about that exact topic of, yeah, your first name on a form is not PII, but your first name, your last name, your address, your phone number, that's PII, and email, it's personally identifiable information. I can now identify you. And with data being so readily available on the web, with the data breaches that have occurred over the last couple of years, I think about the AT&T data breach. There's two of them, and I'm an AT&T customer, and I am convinced that my data is already out in the wild, and it's
Mine
it is
too.
what it is. Yeah, I think you can make the assumption that all of everybody's is. And what do you do to protect yourself from, someone doing a takeover?
Yeah, I'd love to hear. So it's funny that our conversation took us to that particular topic. So, for an organization I worked for, I had a colleague. They were in security, but they had a lot of kind of odd thoughts that kind of drove them, and one that drove me crazy. You and I both just said it. but he would always say, well, my data and pretty much everyone else's is already exposed, right? It's already out there. Mine was OPM, years ago. That was the first time my data got exposed. But you think about all these breaches that have happened. Yes, your data, my data, our family's data, it's likely out there. But his mentality was, well, I don't need to put a lot of effort into data security because it's already out there, so whatever. And it drove me nuts. It drove me nuts. Like, yeah, sure. It's like what you tell your kids growing up. Like, just because they jumped off a bridge or a cliff, are you going to do the same thing? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that rubs me the wrong way.
I would hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, my data's out there, but I need to protect it. Because it shifts and it changes. The older I get, what's important, the data that's important to me is different than, when I was 25. I probably had that kind of an attitude, and now when I was 25, there wasn't any way to get my data necessarily, but it's still, I think about ransomware and people think, oh, well, ransomware's new. No, ransomware's been around a long time. It just targeted you or me as an individual, and they wanted a $500 iTunes gift card or Amazon gift card or whatever that thing was at the time. And, and it's grown into what it is today, but it's not, this isn't new. This isn't a new attack vector. It's just expanded and become more sophisticated, and a lot more, unfortunately, a lot more profitable. And again, I go back to what I said earlier. It's they're stealing your data. It's all about the data. It all comes back to data.
It
So
does. It's the lifeblood. It's the lifeblood of every company out there for sure. Um, Thinking about something that's relatively new, or at least it's gotten maybe easier for folks, and we're starting to hear about it more, and it definitely relates to insider threat. Um, Fake employees, right, or the fake IT worker. You're seeing more and more of that. I'm curious because I've had this conversation just a number of times over the last couple of years. Certainly, my last organization, it was post COVID, so it was really gaining steam. Like, we really need to be checking that folks who just say they are. How are you thinking about that problem? Because when you think about shifting left, right? Generally, think about shifting left in security, like that's shifting super left, even when it comes to hiring with some of that. So, is that on your radar from an insider perspective?
eh,
A little bit.
I don't want to be naive and say that they're not really looking at my industry, but because I think that's probably the wrong approach. Where I think where I'm not, from an IT perspective, I think we vet our people very well. Um, but it doesn't mean that we're not susceptible to it. And I think that that's the key is we are just as susceptible to that happening as someone else. And what are we doing to prevent it? Because they're very sophisticated in how they've done this and how they've approached it. And, and I think it's, how do we, because you do a background check and it's someone else, it's an American who, because I asked that question, I was like, how did they get in? Like, most companies do background checks. Um, on the other side of it too, is we also require drug testing. So you have to go in and, because you're working on the plant floor, we've got to make sure it's a safety thing more than anything else. So I think it's something that it's what I'm reading is it's something that has yet to be solved. I don't know what the answer is because you don't want to not trust people. You don't want to come out and think that every single individual that you're interviewing is, a foreign asset. You can't. It goes back to it goes back to that same thing that we talked about with the data. Yeah, my data's already out there, but I have to still protect myself. I have to still protect my company. And I think it's the same thing. It's how do you find, and I don't know the answer to this. How do you find the balance between what is real and what isn't without um, jeopardizing things, without going, so the pendulum generally will swing one way or the other, and you talk about going far left, you know, where do you find that balance? Where do you find that middle ground? And I don't know what the answer to that is, because I don't trust anybody based on my previous experience. Um, I've gotten a lot better over the years, but I still, it still drives me when people want access to data. I always ask the question, why do you need it? What kind of data are you looking for? What are you going to use it for? Um, and I think that's a valid question. It doesn't mean that I don't trust you. It means that I have control over my data and I understand where it's going and what it's being used for.
Yeah, yeah, and I love how you said that. It's not that I don't trust you, you wanna understand it. And I was actually gonna ask about the whole trust part, because you said something else that was really good too, where you don't want your employees, your colleagues to feel like you don't trust them. Because in my opinion, I think when you do that, that starts to make the culture toxic, which could inadvertently create insider issues, right? Like, hey, they don't trust me, so I'm gonna go do this thing and not they're not gonna be aware of what they're doing. So what I was gonna ask you is and I've been seeing and hearing this a few times lately. And when I was building an insider risk program um at an organization, one of the one of the things we were trying to determine was, for lack of better terms, like a re-verification process of people, right? And we were targeting mainly the VIPs. So, your typical, like, obviously the CEO, C-suite, stuff like that. But also re-verification, i.e., people of administrators. Hey, congratulations, you've got access to the crown jewels. Now, every X amount of time, we're going to pull a new credit check. We're going to do a new this, we're going to do that, just to make sure that things are kosher and you're not becoming a problem. Um, the question's coming, but where we were starting to have a lot of gray area in the conversations is when we were bringing in HR, bringing in legal, bringing in all these folks to have these conversations, and really what started resonating was, is this the culture we want? The idea of, and you said it best, folks thinking that we don't trust them. So now the question, what do you think about some of those organizations or programs where you are doing a re-verification, not for the entire workforce, but for very particular pockets of folks?
My opinion is, I always say, if you see something, say something. And if someone is showing you that, because there's always going to be a tell, I think. And that just is that's another way to validate, yes, something is wrong, or no, something is not wrong. And it's hard to say, to be honest. I don't know the answer to that. Because when I ask the questions, as I talked about the data, I always ask the questions and I always follow it with, I just want to be sure that we're protecting the company, that we're giving you the right data that you need to do your job. And and it's so that it's not personal. So it doesn't feel like I'm attacking someone, or, oh, he doesn't like me, so he's not going to give me access. I was doing a huge data transformation, and this guy wanted about 120 people. This was many years ago. Wanted about 120 people to get access to this data. And I said, no. I said, I need to understand why every single person needs access to this data. because it was PII data, it was NPI data, Um, so the thing, here's something to know about Rick. I always seem to know the C-suite, even at big banks. And I knew the head of the division that I was supporting very well, and had actually had a conversation with him about it the day before because I wanted to understand, and he didn't really know the answer. And so the guy was like, "Well, if I have to call so and so," I said, "Go ahead. I've already talked to him." And it's the scare tactic that you have to avoid, and there's a better way to approach it. And I tell you that story because that's where I learned that I can't just say no, that I have to ask questions, that I have to understand, and I have to come at it from that perspective, because you're going to get a much better response when you meet them when you meet people where they are, and not do that automatic no. I had a development manager. I used to do systems for my line of business, and I had a development manager. Every time I went to him with something, he would say, "No, we can't do it. It's not possible. It can't be done." And what I realized was he wanted to be part of the solution. And if I brought him in as part of the solution, then I'd get the answer that I wanted. Um, and it's learning. I tell that story because it's learning where people are. It's understanding their motivation and how, and it, maybe it's form of social engineering. I don't know, but really at the end of the day, that's how you get, you bring people. I like to say I'm using it for good and not for evil, in that regard, because I want people to understand what we need to do to protect the company, and why. I think the why is important to certain people.
I agree, and I would hope all those listening have had similar situations, but 100% what you said. One of my first mentors. So I got into security. I said, "Oh boy, I get to tell everybody no. That's gonna be fun, right?" I'm in my early 20s, like that's great. And my very first performance review, he said, "Ward, you're really good at being the master of no, N-O. I need you to be the master of no, K-N-O-W, i.e., know what they're trying to do, why they're trying to do it, but also like why it's bad. What's a better way of doing it? All of those things." And it goes back to a lot of what you just said, where if you just tell people no, they're going to tell you to kick stones and they're going to go do it a different way. Or they're going to tell you no right back, and you're not going to foster that relationship and partnership, and you're not going to be successful. Certainly not in data security, because in data security, oftentimes you're not the one creating the data, you're simply protecting it. It's the business, it's the people that you're serving at that point.
Yeah, and I think that's really key. It goes back to, you need to understand your business. If you understand your business, when someone comes to you with something, I really love that. It's not no NO, it's no KNOW. And that's great. I'm going to hold on to that nugget, because I think that it goes back. If you understand the business, then you can ask better questions when someone asks you for something. Is this for X or is this for Y? And what it tells that person is, I want to understand and I want to learn what you're doing and why you're doing it. Because if I understand it, then I feel more comfortable and you feel more comfortable that our data is safe. And, we have tools in place that if you're trying to send, budget information or whatever outside of the company, we can stop it. But I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to be that, the controls have to be in place, but I don't want to not trust you. You can't just turn off the data for everyone. It just doesn't work. That's just not possible.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think it also, something else you've said a few times now in your stories is you've made friends, or at least relationships, with those leaders in the company. The story you just told, you knew the division leader. So when that individual said, "Well, do I need to call so and so?" You're like, "All right, whatever." Like we're already talking. I think, my personal opinion, that's key. I've been very blessed to lead a number of individuals over my career. And one of the first things that I tell those folks, no matter where they are in their career, junior or senior, I tell them make friends in the business, make friends at your level, sure, but also the skip level, also the twice skip level. Like, go and be comfortable having a conversation with a director, with a VP, because inevitably, they're going to want to talk to you for something, and you're certainly going to want to talk to them for something. And if you already have that relationship, it's a heck of a lot easier.
That I think that's critical. That's most important. It's really understanding that relationships drive that because if them that they build that trust with you. You know, it's funny because I've got skip levels with my directs direct, and it's important. And the reason that it's important is because now he knows that he can come and talk to me if he needs to talk to me. Now he knows that if his manager's out on vacation, that it's okay to come to me. I built that relationship, so he doesn't feel like he doesn't have support. There's something I learned at two companies ago was that I had a leader who implemented that skip level and really and wanted to, and it was about listening and understanding from his direct reports, and that was the culture. And so I really like to try and create that culture of you can come and talk to me. Just because I'm the CISO doesn't mean that I sit up here in this tower. I'm in the trenches with you. We're a small organization. We got to work together. We got to have those. We have to be able to debate, I think, more than anything else. And my job, more than anything else, is to listen. I need to listen to what they're saying because they're the ones that are in the trenches. I am a little bit, but really they're the ones in the day to day. They sit in the plant, they see what's going on. They're able to have real conversations and understand.
I'm curious because obviously, based on everything you've said, you're kind of a people person, at least professionally. You have an easy time talking to folks of all levels. So, and bringing it all back to insider threats, I think that's key. You said it very well. You're reading folks. You're kind of getting a feel for what they say, and you can kind of read into what's going on. So, for those listening that may be thinking about kind of building out some insider capabilities, again, whether you call it insider risk, insider threat, who cares? What would you what words of advice would you give them when it comes to building those relationships, across departments, across levels?
So it's really it's what a mentor taught me and what I teach the people that I mentor. It's having coffee conversations. Virtual is fine, but it's reaching out and it's asking for 15 minutes and it's coming prepared. So what is your goal for those 15 minutes? So don't just go in and, shoot the breeze. Go in with some very, understanding. And it's when I mentor someone, I tell them, when you come and talk to me, come prepared. And I've been mentoring someone now for a couple of years, and he really set the bar really high because he's very prepared. He knows what he wants to ask, and he wants to learn, and he wants to be challenged. And we're able to have that. We've been working together for a couple of years, so we have that relationship and we have that rapport. And he texts me if he needs something, between our meetings. But it's really come prepared, and at the end of the conversation, ask if it's something you can do every month or every 2 months or once a quarter so that you continue that relationship and you continue to understand what is important to them. Because if you understand what's important to them and they feel heard, they're going to come to you. They're going to say, hey, good example. I got an email from one of my peers in the business asking me, hey, I keep getting this. Is it a fish? And I let me look, and I did the research and I dug into it a little bit. It's not a fish. I said it was misrouted to you. but I communicated with her and she felt comfortable coming to me with those questions because I built a relationship with her.
That is amazing. I always have told my directs and some of my peers, like, that is my goal, especially in data security. Like, I want people to proactively be inquisitive, come to me and my team and say, "Hey, I'm doing this thing, right? Am I doing the right thing? Should I be doing it?" That's amazing when I hear those stories. Even something as minor as that, right? Email misrouted, like, that's great that she thought about you, reached out to you, felt comfortable enough, and got an answer.
Well, she's mad at me now because I took her time from when I was with my boss. So, you know,
It's all cyclical.
you know, I'll say that when I got the job leading the data team, my manager said, you don't have all of the data experience, but you have the relationships with people, and it's your ability to build those relationships is why I put you in this role, because I know you're gonna be able to handle all of those things that are coming your way. And I did, and I made a lot of mistakes. You know, don't be afraid to fail. Um, just learn from it, pick yourself up, learn from it, and don't do it again. Um, you know, I had a conversation with a mentor, with a leader, who's a friend, and we were talking. He was building a new organization. I really wanted to be a part of this organization, and I got it. We talked for a year. You know, every month we met, we spend a half hour. You know, I would leave with questions and I would send him articles and things as he built the organization. And he pulled me into the organization, and you know, that's where I spent the last 5 years. And you know, I said to him, I said, I want a job where I can fail. And I said, I don't want to fail so hard that there's a breach, but I want to fail so that I learn and I grow. Because if I'm not failing, I'm not learning. And you know, not big failures. It's just I make little mistakes. You know, I talk a lot. And so sometimes the wrong things come out. You know, my brain works faster than my mouth sometimes. And I've learned over the years how to curb that, but I'm not perfect. You know, I'm a lot more careful today in my writing. When I'm sending emails, I have to know my audience. And when I'm communicating, what I can and can't say. You know, when you're talking to HR, you're going to say something different than when I'm having a conversation with my leader, who I have a good relationship with, and I can vent to him if I need to vent to him, and I have. So, you know, it's that balance. It's I'm not going to go vent to the CEO. Um, you know, I'm not I'm gonna if I have a conversation with the CEO, it's generally it's just a hallway conversation because when we see each other, um, or in the elevator. And he's available and he's security minded, which is great. He reported the fish. He was very proud of it. Um, and I love that. So again, I think it's understanding and meeting people. I go right back to where I started. Meet people where they are. Understand where they are, meet them where they are, and then you can move on. Then you can build that relationship and that rapport.
Love that. Love that. And so, kind of move into a little bit about you, and you kind of give us a sample, right, of kind of where you've been in some of your roles. But I'm curious. So you're a CISO. You've been in your current role, 6 months or so. Like, how did you get here? What was really your first steps, and
It's
how
like
did you
this.
trip and stumble? Yeah, yeah, yeah. What was it? What was your journey?
Back in the 1900s, it started. I started my technology career doing software support. Um, Back when they had multimedia CD-ROM drives in all computers and sound cards, and you know, because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and so I got this contract job and worked it into a 5 year job, and I worked that into doing call center implementations. You know, making sure that the T1 lines are laid, both voice and data. Make sure that people are trained right. They know how to answer the phone. They know what they need to do. Um, and I took that 5 years and I back in the, late 90s, early 2000s, when the dot-com boom happened, I did that. I dot-commed, as it were. And I went from company to company. I went to this company, they laid me off. I went to this company, they laid me off. I went to this company, and I learned, and at every place I learned something. At every place I got more confident in my ability. And so when I decided I needed something more stable, which is why I took a job at a bank. I don't know how stable it was, because I realized that layoffs are layoffs regardless of whether it's a .com or it's a bank. But, I'm an avid learner, and I always want to know more. And so, I started as a business systems analyst, and I took that and moved into data, did some huge data transformations. And when I was working at the tail end of this big process improvement, was a 4-year project. My business information security officer partner said, "You really need to come be in security. You have that mindset." I left Los Angeles and I moved to Charlotte with the goal of doing that. And I did. And I did a lot of different things, but everything I did in that, in information security, was the ability to learn something new. So whether it's understanding the frameworks, so the NIST framework, the PCI framework, what was the FFIEC CAT, which is now the CRI framework, ISO 27001, all of those things, I really kind of dove into. I did cyber public policy. I had she's a good friend today. She was a mentor. She taught me a lot, and in how to read things and understand things. I got active in the fintech community and did a lot of work there. And, then I moved into cybercrime, and I found threat intelligence, and I found more data than I can dig into, because I think, again, it's all data. And, and I am partnering with law enforcement. I think public-private partnerships are critical. And if you're not doing that, you should. Every CISO, and I think every information security person, should know someone in the FBI to call. And if you don't, where are you? What are you going to do? But I think that is, I did some really cool stuff that I can't talk about, over those 5 years. And I parlayed that into another role, that was driving strategy. We were changing the way we thought about risk from a cyber perspective, and really thinking about cyber threats and the risk of that threat happening. So it's not the risk, it's the threat. And are we protected against the threat? And that experience kind of drives where I am today. We talked a lot about relationships, and we have a very tight cyber community here in Charlotte, and a lot of us know each other. And that's how I got an interview for this job. Someone I know, who I'm friends with, reached out, said, "Hey, are you interested?" And I will be honest, my initial reaction was, "Goodness, no, I'm not." Because I was heading back to the airport with my former CISO, who had just got moved into a CTO role, and he was deleting things off his phone, and he was so excited. And I made a comment to him that I never want to be a CISO, and here I am. And I'll cap that story with, I ran into him my second week on the job in the lounge at LaGuardia Airport. He and I are friends, and I'm friends with his wife, and I've mentored his son. And he said to me, "He said, you got a new job. What are you doing?" And I told him, and he just stopped. And I realized that it's very different in a manufacturing company than it is in a bank.
Sure.
And it's, the culture here is fantastic. It's a culture of learning. It's a culture of empowerment. It's a culture of promoting from within. It's if someone wants to do something, it's supporting them in getting to that end goal and staying with the company, because that institutional knowledge leaves, and when that institutional knowledge leaves, what are you losing? And this company really thinks, the leadership really thinks about it like that. And it's really fascinating to me that I don't feel like I'm just another line on a spreadsheet, but a human being who is cared about, who, regardless of where I sit in the organization, everybody works together. There's no airs, I guess, for lack of a better word, about it. And I'll end with the gentleman that I mentor said to me when we spoke last. He said, "How's things going at the job?" And I said, "I'm completely overwhelmed and I love every minute of it. And I love what I'm doing, and there's so much work to do, and I learn something every day." And he laughed and he said, "For the last 6 months, you haven't complained once." And I thought that says it all right there. Because I'm good at complaining. Don't get me wrong. But if I'm not complaining, and things are good. And I'm learning and growing every day. And I have a leader who actually takes the time to teach me, who makes me think differently. And boy, what a difference a good leader makes.
Oh yeah, yeah. Sounds amazing, and boy, you definitely have quite the background. Love to hear it. So you mentioned you like to network. You got a good network. If folks want to connect with you, what's the best way to do so?
Find me on LinkedIn. If you're able to send me a message, because you have to have my personal email to get in. And just because the noise, I couldn't handle the noise. And if you follow me, I always look. And if you're not a salesperson, not the salespeople are, it depends on what you do. I'll generally hit that connect button. I do a lot of work in Israel. I know Centra. I know your CEO, and it's become very important to me, and it's become my passion over the last 10 months. Generally, if you're in Tel Aviv, I'll probably connect with you.
Nice, love it.
Because I want to help. If I can help, I'm going to help. I'm not in it for money. I'm in it for the joy of talking to some very smart people. I learn something with every conversation. I start most of my mornings in Tel Aviv, and it's a great way to start the day.
Totally agree. Well, man, Rick,
You have to.
thank you. Oh, I have to. You're right. I do. I'm a little bit one-sided on that one. Oh man. Well, Rick, this has been great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
So this has been another exciting episode of Guardians of the Data. Big thank you to our audience. We hope you enjoyed the episode and learned something today. Please tell others in your network to follow and listen. See you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Guardians of the Data. Thanks for tuning in. For show notes and more, visit guardiansofthedata.show. Guardians of the Data is made possible by support from Centra. To see how we help organizations discover and classify all of their data accurately and automatically while quickly achieving petabyte-scale data protection without the fuss, please visit centra.io. Catch you next time.